ZBrush is notorious for messing up the scale of objects, especially when you need the scale to work right with other software. This is because most of its features are tuned to work best on models that are about 1 to 4 units in the longest direction. That's why everything is scaled by default to be 2 units wide. Now, ZBrush does some calculations under the hood to compensate for this, but in the end, it causes more problems than it solves. In this video, we'll take a peek under the hood and see some ways of dealing with the issue. Okay, so we've got a basic sphere here that you might get if you just append it as a subtool. And let's take a look at how big it is. Let's go under Geometry and Size. And you can see it is 2 units in X, Y, and Z. Now let's import a file that we know exactly how big it is. Go to Import. Okay, under the exercise files, go into the Scale Problems folder for this video. And let's open up this file. And I know that this file is 10 millimeters in the longest dimension. So let's go ahead and open this up. So what we see, according to my custom grid, is that it's actually more like 2 units right here. So that's definitely not right. If we go and look in our size here now, you can see 2 units in the Z axis, and then 1.5 roughly in Y and 1 in X. Now let's see what happens if we measure it with a Transpose tool. So I'm going to click on any of the Transpose tools here, rotate around to a side view, and I'll just draw out a new manipulator here from the back side to the front side. And you can see that is pretty much 10 units. So why are we getting a scale of 2 units in the size, but 10 units with the Transpose tool? And that is because ZBrush has resized our model when we imported it to be 2 units in the longest dimension. Let's scroll down to Export. And what you can see in here is a scale compensation unit. So what basically happened is ZBrush divided the model by a certain amount. Basically, so it was 10 units to begin with. ZBrush scaled it down to 2 units. So that's a factor of 5. This scale setting right here is a fudge factor, basically, to sort of compensate for that change in scale. Now, for the most part, this works under the hood. If we export this model, it will multiply the units of 2 by this scale, and it'll end up being the same size it was when it was imported, or before it was imported. And that's what it's doing with the Transpose manipulator. It's multiplying everything by this scale amount. So what would normally be 2 is getting multiplied by 5, and that's why we get 10 up here in the units. However, not everything in ZBrush respects this scale factor. For example, if we're trying to extrude thickness on an object, and we go into Geometry, and we go into Edge Loop, and let's say we want to use panel loops here to add thickness to this object. Let's go ahead and set some of these settings: 0 polish, 0 bevel, negative elevation, 1 loop, that's fine. And let's say we want to give this a thickness of 0.1. And then we go ahead and do panel loops. The thickness will actually come out to the wrong amount because it's not taking into account that scale factor. So if I hit Control Z to undo that, what I usually like to do is bypass the scale factor so that everything is the actual units that it should be. So let's get out of the Transpose tool, go into draw mode. And what I like to do is go back to Export and set this scale to 1. Now what I do is I go to Subtool, and if I re-import the subtool, it should come in at the correct scale. Okay, now you can see that if we go to Geometry and Size, you can see that scale is coming in correct now. 10 units in the longest dimension. If we go to Export, you can see scale of 1. We look at this from a side view, we go back to the Transpose, we drag out, see how long that is, and it is the correct measurement. Now, obviously, this is a bit more complicated than I would really like it to be. I would like ZBrush to just not mess with the units at all and just make sure everything is just exactly what it should be without any fudge factors. That would be really nice. And I use the size sliders. I actually move these into my custom interface so that I can see these sizes all the time, because when I'm working with objects for 3D printing, I want to be able to just look at a glance and see exactly how big an object is in every dimension. But if I let ZBrush use that scale factor, this number is not going to match up with the actual size of the object. For this reason, I also like to have the export scale. I like to bring this into my custom interface so I can always see at a glance if that's set to 1. If it's set to something else, then I know that ZBrush has messed with the scale and I can change it accordingly. Okay, so this tip was a little bit cumbersome, but unfortunately that's what you have to deal with when ZBrush itself makes things cumbersome under the hood. But hopefully once you figure out how this works, you won't have quite so many problems with scale in the future.